Hey, it's Mo Egger. If you and your buddies are looking for a place to post up this football season, how about Long Neck Sports Grill? 3 locations in northern Kentucky, all of them very easy to get to. You got Wilder, Hebron, and Richwood. There's 4K TVs all over the place. And this is important, the sound's going to be on for all the big games. The menu is fantastic. I love the wings, and no place has a better beer selection. Long Neck Sports Grill, perfect for football season. Stay late, come often. All right, so let's bring in Dr. Shankar Narayanan. He is with OrthoCincy. By the way, OrthoCincy, if you need someone, OrthoCincy has locations in Cincinnati, Northern Kentucky, Southeast Indiana. Plus, they've got locations with flexible evening hours and hours on Saturdays, and that's really important. So check them out. Find a location close to you. Bookmark it, OrthoCincy.com. Plus, you never need an appointment. You can make an appointment, but you never need one. They're not going to turn you away. So check out OrthoCincy.com. Dr. Narayanan, I appreciate the time. Let's talk concussions. Tua Tagovailoa situation loomed over that Bengals game on Thursday night. I know there's a lot of Twitter doctors on the internet and stuff that claim to be concussion experts. I'd rather talk to a doctor like yourself. Let's start with the basics. Whether I'm watching an athlete and I think, you know what, he might be dealing with some sort of head trauma, or I'm dealing with something like that myself. What are the symptoms? What are the tells? What should I be looking for in determining whether or not somebody is dealing with a concussion?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. So I think in order to understand and really dive into this, one needs to really understand the pathophysiology of a concussion. What really is a concussion? So a concussion really is when you have an acceleration and a deceleration injury to the brain. So the brain is locked into the skull. It's protected by the skull, but the brain can still shift around. So when somebody hits the ground or they somehow have some sort of head trauma, the brain actually moves within the skull, and this can cause brain swelling. And the pathophysiology behind that's very interesting. But what happens is the brain functions via these things called neurotransmitters. And what you actually have happen is slowing of the neurotransmitters in the brain. So clinically speaking, when a lot of people say things like, oh, a patient or, an athlete is quote unquote slow, they really are, because you have impaired neurotransmitter function. So you actually have things like slowed mental processing, memory dysfunction. You may even have some emotional or psychological dysfunction, irritability, and impaired attention, because literally speaking, the brain is slow. When you have more outward signs, things like headaches, dizziness, nausea, maybe even upwards to a loss of consciousness, confusion, or retrograde amnesia, then you really need to get into where a kid or an athlete may be taken out of the game. And when I looked into this, the NFL actually has something called a no-go list. And what will happen is if the UNC, the unaffiliated neurotrauma consultant, and the head team physician will get together and evaluate the athlete. And if they sustain a loss of consciousness, confusion, amnesia, or something called gross motor instability, they are termed as a no-go, meaning that they need to go to the locker room and they are not allowed to return to the game. And this definition of gross motor instability is what a lot of people, experts, non-experts, are very concerned and focused on, because a lot of people saw Tua come up and then stumble and fall down, and they think that, oh, Tua suffered some gross motor instability. He should not have been allowed to come back in the game. Now, it's not for me or anyone to say, because there were physicians on the sideline that actually took him back to the locker room and determined that he did not actually suffer any gross motor instability. He was able to come back into the game. So when it comes to, all of those kinds of concussive symptoms, there are a lot of different things that go into a concussion simply because every individual is different and every hit and head trauma is very different.
I want to get your thoughts on the protocols, but let me stay with the impact of head trauma and symptoms and things of that nature, because I think one of the concerns here is obviously any concussion, any head injury carries with it a lot of serious things that we should be talking about. Then there's the possibility that we could have been dealing here with somebody who suffered potentially consecutive head injuries, if you will, 2 over a 5-day span. It takes time to get over a concussion. I've had one, and it took me some time. What sort of added issues could we be dealing with if you have somebody who is suffering from multiple concussions within a pretty small amount of time?
Yeah, I think there is something that is not well defined, but people have probably all heard of it, called second impact syndrome. And that's when you have a concussion and the brain swells. And just like when you fall and sprain or strain a ligament or, have a bone bruise, the swelling takes a lot of time to resolve. And that's purely dependent on how each individual reacts and the amount of trauma that's suffered. So when you have one concussion and you are unable to fully recover from that concussion, you still have trauma to the brain, and the brain is recovering from that trauma. The brain is still swollen. The neurotransmitters are functioning slowly. And what can happen is if you have another injury to the brain, you can actually have really truly catastrophic damage, because the brain will swell even more, and it can potentially lead to something where the brain stem swells and herniates down through what we call the foramen magnum, or the area where the brain turns into the spinal cord. And this can be absolutely catastrophic for any individual if they return without having recovered from their previous concussion.
From your vantage point as a medical professional, what changes, if at all, would you like to see from the NFL's concussion protocol?
That's really tough for me to say, because I think this was developed in accordance with medical professionals, and the NFL has a head, neck, and spine team that does a very good job of monitoring all of these protocols. I truly think the NFL did a very good job of following their protocol with Tua when I looked into it and did a really deep dive. I don't think it's necessarily for me to make changes, but I think that the independent neurotrauma consultant was probably the best thing that they did. And that person needs to maintain their independence and not have any allegiance to the team, so that they're not swayed to bring a player back into the game or on the field by a team physician or by team ownership, because that player could significantly impact the outcome of the game. They need to be in the corner of the player, take the player's best interests at heart and their health at heart, and really understand that the player needs to do what's best for them in the long term, and they are the most important person within that group to do an independent, unbiased assessment and make sure they do what's best for the player.
Dr. Shankar Narayanan, OrthoCincy. Again, check out OrthoCincy.com. The folks there do unbelievable work. We are appreciative of their partnership with us and giving us a medical professional to talk to about injuries and other medical issues as they relate to sports, and specifically the NFL, every single Wednesday. Hey, it's Mo Egger. It's football season, and there's no better place to post up to watch the games than Long Neck Sports Grill. Start with the TV setup. There's 4K TVs all over the place, and the sound is on for all the big games. Then there's the menu. It is awesome, and it's extensive. I love the wings, and of course, you need beer. No place has a better beer selection than Long Neck's. 3 Northern Kentucky locations, Wilder, Hebron, and Richwood. Long Neck Sports Grill. Stay late. Come often.